This is Leid Stories. I'm Utrice Leid, and we are continuing our discussion about whatever is coming down the pike. We never know from day to day these days what is happening. I usually have my subjects all prepared, and, and only to find out sometimes minutes before the program, or even as the program is proceeding, that, well, we have to throw that out and do something else because things have changed. This is the kind of administration we're dealing with, and we always have to be prepared. But I want to talk about a bunch of things, not too much. I don't want to crowd the plate. I want to give you enough space to do your own commentary. Well, Joe Biden has raised reportedly $364.5 million just last month alone, and doing very, very well in the fundraising department, so that he has lots of money to do lots of things with. But that raises an interesting question. What is he doing? We get, perhaps more so than the Trump administration and Donald Trump, the candidate, we do get more headway on what's coming next, what's the next big feature. But it is interesting that here we are, literally on the cusp of a massive election, and there are so many things that haven't come up, uh, issues that one would have expected to be, you know, the center, the focus of both campaigns. Trump is off doing his thing, and his thing is mercurial. He could start off with one theme and at 1 o'clock, and then at 1:30, it's something different. Uh, but it all has to do with a sense of despondency, a sense of urgency that has crept over his campaign, that causes him to look like wherever he can find uh, something relevant to say, he will do that. Not that it's a plan, not that it's part of his campaign per se, but that he would capture somebody's attention in the moment. That's how things are going. Um, but it is interesting now that Trump is leaning toward Latinos. He's going after the Latino community big time because he needs numbers. And he's realizing that his campaign, although he has his band of dedicated followers, the fact is they alone can't take him across the line. So he needs to expand. And the only logical place for Trump to expand, and this is true and has been true in political campaigns for several decades now, you look to where you can find salvation, and they always come up with the same answer. Look to Blacks and Latinos. They're the ones who will get you over the line. They're the people who you could count on to uh, give you some semblance of victory, because the larger community that historically has been the mainstay of political campaigns, they're now becoming more and more, what's the word? Fickle. That's the word, fickle. They're not, uh, they're not, you can't count on them. They're not permanent. Um, Many of them are, obviously. Trump has a large following, and they follow him for all kinds of reasons. Not that he can openly champion all of their concerns and adopt their concerns as part of his campaign or the lead points of his campaign. But he obviously has come to realize that he's a one note wonder. He has to diversify, he has to look like he appeals to a broad spectrum. So where do you find a broad spectrum? Where you always have found it. And this is the interesting thing about American politics, as racist as this country is. When it comes to election time, people start getting a bit sober. And they start admitting things like, well, we can't maintain the same line as we have for all these years. We've got to act as, at least that we recognize that other people exist and that we ought to pay attention to their concerns. So this is where Trump is right now. He's realized that it can't be simply about the base that he has dictating his entire campaign. He's going to have to find a way to broaden his appeal. And the only logical place to go would be the place that he has ignored all this time, all these years he's been in office, being sometimes openly hostile to these groups. He now realizes the importance of diversifying. Yes, that's a new word for Trump. He's diversifying. So he's looking to broaden his appeal to Latinos and to African Americans. He's not doing a good job of it, but at least he has articulated a willingness to reach out. Not because he has no other choice, but because he is an enlightened candidate. And he's doing his best to let people know that he wants to be inclusive. His candidacy is about bringing people together, not dividing them, as is the public opinion generally, that he's a divider, not someone who brings people together. So look for that as a major thrust of his campaign. At least he'll try it for as long as he could stand it, and then go back to operating the way he has been. But this is interesting that he and his campaign have finally come to realize that you can't run an all-white campaign and win, not in this country. At some point, you're going to have to recognize that the United States is made up of a whole bunch of different people with a whole range of histories and experiences. And of course, he has no real proof that over the years, whether in politics or even in his own private life, his own businesses, he has had the habit of developing significant relationships with several different groups. So now he's got that work to do, and he's trying to do it. So we'll see how that goes. But while Biden has, how should I say, Biden has the handle, or he has the upper hand in terms of where he has gone for money and has been successful at getting it. Trump is now trying to outdo that, but he has been hampered by his own history of hostility to and racism. He's hampered by it. He can't easily erase it, you see, and be genuine. Everybody would know he's doing such and such a thing specifically to advance the idea that he's a diversifying guy. He's a guy who likes to reach out to all Americans. Yeah, sure. Okay. But Biden has raised so much money and proving that he has treasure now. He is able to literally make even more or greater inroads in areas that he hadn't before. We still have problems with his campaign, as we have been discussing. So he has treasure. That's a significant chunk of change to get in 1 month, $364.5 million. He is the guy with treasure. However, Trump is the guy who owns the Treasury. So does Biden's treasure, how does that Biden's treasure match Trump's hold on the US Treasury? Are they equal? No, they're not. Trump still has an upper hand here because as President of the United States, he can command, at least this is what he intends to do, you can see it, the national treasury will become his chief funding source for a lot of things that he wants to do. He has Stephen Mnuchin, who is the director of the Treasury, who will execute all the plans that he wants executed and that need immediate funding. Where do you find convenient funding? Yes, the people's tax dollars. Trump is now going to convert, well, not just now, but he is going to aggressively now convert the national treasury to his own funding source, his own campaign source of funds. For example, especially since he is pursuing these close relationships with African Americans and Latinos, let's take, for example, the fact that this administration has pretty much turned its back on Puerto Rico, especially after the hurricane and the consequences of it. We have more than 80,000 homes still needing roofs. We have streets that still need to be repaired. We have water systems that still need to be revived and put back into use. We have all kinds of crazy things happening in Puerto Rico. And all of them requiring funding, which this administration has decided, well, that's not really at the top of the list right now. But suddenly it has come to the top of the list. Trump doesn't have nearly the kind of money that people think his campaign has. So conveniently, and I think this is something that lawyers should look into, should the President of the United States be allowed now, and it's going to be an interesting dance, to open up the Treasury, to fund all kinds of programs that absolutely were neglected all these years. And now that he needs these numbers to boost his victory at the polls, uh, hey, open up the Treasury. We could get money right away. So that is, in my view, that's what's going to happen. Never mind the fact that the news was talking about Biden being so successful in fundraising. Yeah, as I said, he has treasure now, but Trump owns the Treasury and has every intention of using it or abusing it in order to meet his campaign needs. So we will see this uh, a whole bunch of projects that Trump will be recommending, that things should be sped up. These things have gone unattended for too long. Let's get these projects underway. Let's get them finished. Let's get people hired. Let's get, the projects done. Of course, before the election. It is amazing the degree of contempt that this president has for the people and the resources of the people. Puerto Rico has been, we've done programs on it. Puerto Rico has been pretty much discarded, left to figure out on its own how to solve its problems that it did not cause. But the person now who is in charge of the Treasury will now open it up. And suddenly there will be all these programs that will be funded right away so that there could be proof on the island of Puerto Rico that thanks to Trump, he had to come out and do these things himself. It could not be left to an administration or to the local government to do. So he had to get behind it himself. And he's going to make a lot of noise about it in order to generate votes from Puerto Ricans, not only in Puerto Rico, but also on the mainland. So cynical, but so typically political. So that is one thing that I wanted to talk about. The other I wanted to talk about is, and it's sad, it's a sad commentary, and I may get, a twinge or two from listeners about it. And that concerns, let me get to my notes, the multi-million-dollar settlement of the Breonna Taylor shooting. I thought about it quite a bit. And I believe there are lessons here that will not be talked about generally, but that we need to raise and to understand. And not in a way that condemns anybody, but this is just how life in many quarters that are generally ignored, how life unfolds. There was great reaction to the decision to settle this case. As you know, Breonna Taylor was killed in the course of a no-knock, the service of a no-knock warrant on her apartment in Louisville, Kentucky. And when it's no knock, nobody announces themselves. And the cops apparently didn't do that. They did not announce themselves, but they were there to serve a warrant. So it was a kind of invasion. They just show up, they barge through the door, and the shooting began, and she was a victim of it. She was killed in the shooting, the shootout that occurred. On the one hand, people are stuck. I mean, they follow the case up until the point, well, the city sped up the process. The city took this as a priority item that they wanted to communicate to the entire city that this was not going to be treated in the historic nature of how these cases have been treated, but that this was a priority. She was, according to the city as well, she was an innocent victim. This should not have happened. There were procedures that should have been followed, and it was wrong of the police to enter her home that way. And then all of the things that happened afterwards emanated from that, including and especially her loss of life. I'm moving away from that for the time being and talking about something else, and that something else is the lesson that we should learn from this event, this tragic event, this catastrophe. Here's a young woman who early in her life had some serious decisions to make, but she decided to become a mother. She decided to go back to school and to take courses and to qualify as an emergency medical technician. She had ambitions. She wanted to better her life. And she wanted new horizons in that life. But she got a lot of the same that many women in communities like hers end up getting. And that is less than what she deserved. According to the reports that I've read, she had had two significant relationships, personal relationships in her life. And both of them involved men who were in the drug trade. And so you start out with a young woman full of hopes and dreams and aspirations. And yet, having all of that challenged on an ongoing basis by choices in her life. as to who would be in her life, helping her and partnering with her through life. And in both cases, these two significant relationships she reportedly had involved people who brought into the relationship a great deal of a downside. And you see right away what the story is here. The story is that in some parts of our world, even when people make a strong effort to move on, move ahead, move up, and this is particularly true of women, they find themselves enmeshed in a world that they should have left behind or should not have entered at all. Nothing good comes from that world. And then the ultimate irony here to me was, and that's where I remained stuck for a couple of days on this thing, thinking about it. She obviously recognized that this was not the way she wanted to live. She obviously recognized that she wanted to pursue something better, and she did. And she was doing that. And still ended up a victim. Still ended up in a scenario where she literally paid with her life for living in that milieu. You could try as hard as you want to, but it was a 100% result. You've tried twice. You ended up with the same kind of men, bringing into your life the same kinds of challenges and trouble. And this is at a point where you are ready to cross the line into a brighter day, a better day. You're a mother now. You have a child. But you have invested in making a life better than what you had before. And the result is as tragic as if you made no attempt at all. And it all involves choices made about who you bring into your life. And what do they bring into your life? We know the answers, and the answer is that they bring death, destruction. They bring an abrupt end to the ambitions that you had for yourself. As hard as you tried to climb, you're dragged right back down into this cesspool. And finally, you lose your life. It is a game, a tragic game that a lot of women play in our communities. And until something like this happens, we don't think about it. All of the stories that I have read, well, of course, she is dead now. And there's an effort to be kind to her in death. So the story takes the view that it is the police who ended her life illegally, unwarrantedly. But I still see the story as the death occurring long before they entered and barged into her apartment and shot her down. The death is that for so many women, so many people across the board, trying very hard every single day simply to improve their lot. They go to school, they invest in themselves and a possible future. They make their own way as best they can. And yet cannot or do not escape the inevitability of a system that would drag you into it and mesh you like a web and countermand everything you're trying to do to better yourself, to prepare yourself for a brighter day. It drags you right back down. And sometimes to the point where you lose your life. And none of this has anything to do with you, except that you made choices, bad choices. Because in some cases, people believe those are the only choices that they could make. Better to have half of a man than no man at all. We have to rethink this. We have to spend some time educating our young women, especially, that these are not good choices. You were on the right track. You were doing the right thing. All to see a better day. All to have a better life. And then you bring people into that life that you're trying to clean up and trying to progress with. People who bring misery and death. And now your child is left by herself. You're not there anymore. This is a very serious problem. It is not talked about much, if at all. But this is the price that many people are paying for making bad choices, for not putting themselves and a brighter future ahead of what seems like a good choice. It isn't a good choice. On any level, it's not a good choice. But we've suffered so much damage in our communities that for some people, they make the choice to settle. They settle for way less than they should. And in this case, it ended with a hail of bullets in her own apartment that she was trying to get her life together in. But now the story is about big money coming her family's way because the city feels that it should pay for the mistakes of the police who burst into her apartment to arrest the man in her life. And it ended up in a hail of bullets and with her dead. That is what we need to be thinking about. It is not about police procedure and whether she would still be alive today, whether if police observed and implemented proper procedure. That's not the discussion. The discussion is she and many countless women in our communities silently pay the ultimate price for making the wrong decision. And we have to begin a discussion about what is your worth? What is your worth to yourself that you would allow yourself to be enmeshed in something that has no hope of giving you a good life? We'll take this break and come back to your questions and your observations right after this. You're listening to Leid Stories on PRN.FM. I'm Utrice Leid, and we're talking about Breonna Taylor, who was killed in a hail of bullets as police made a no-knock raid on her apartment in search of whatever it is they were in search of. They never did say, but it had to do with drugs and drug dealing. And that's not where she was. She was in the business of trying to better her life. She was trying to get on with her education, raising a daughter, being a responsible mother, but she made some tragic mistakes. And these mistakes are typical of the kinds of mistakes that we have run into in our communities way too often, where people instead pursue, despite all the things that they know that they should be doing as opposed to should not be doing, and they get mixed up with people who bring them into a world that very often ends in tragedy. She has lost her life, although she was not involved in that life, but she has lost her life. And we need to start discussions about what women owe to themselves in pursuing their goals and dreams and aspirations, and what it is that they should never settle for, because it brings tragedy, and you can predict that from day one. It affected me a great deal, her death, because for one thing, she didn't deserve it. She didn't deserve to die like that. But we have to see it in its totality. It's not so much the police and what they did by barging into her apartment and causing an ugly chain of events that ended up in her dying. But that if you go back a little further in her life, you see that the chain of events began much earlier with bad decisions made. For all kinds of reasons, women make bad decisions because they believe they could never have somebody else in their lives. They want children to cement these relationships. And the last thing they think of is, well, what are you bringing to me? What is it that you will be contributing to my life? How are you helping to lift me up the way I am trying to lift you up? What kind of partner would you be to me and to our children if we have children? These are the kinds of discussions we need to start very, very seriously. We need to start examining the relationships between men and women in our communities and how it may not look connected, but I assure you it absolutely is connected to her death. Jackie from Brooklyn, you're on the air.
Okay, hi. Good afternoon. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
To you and the family. Okay, I'm concerned because Breonna Taylor, I understand all the points that you're making, and they're valid and legitimate, and they need to be addressed. But what I'm troubled by, Breonna Taylor, I don't think is a good example because she was a victim of police violence. They went to the wrong address. The warrant was not valid for her home, and whomever she was involved with, that had nothing to do with them coming in and killing her. Now, the other issue
that on in the background, it's a radio or television, and we're hearing it.
Wait, hold on. I'm listening to you on Alexa, and I'm talking to you on the phone. Sorry. Can you hear me better now?
Much better.
This is the issue for me. First of all, I want to preface what I'm saying by I am a person who works with family in the area of family law, and hopefully, prayerfully, one day I'm going to have a podcast and all that to talk about the very issues that you are talking about poor choices and the consequences of those choices. But Breonna Taylor in specific I don't think is a good example because the Attorney General of Kentucky, who is allegedly was supposed to be investigating this whole incident, it turns out that he was the top aide to Mitch McConnell. They settled the case for $12 million. There was never any police officers arrested or brought up for investigation or charges or anything. I think one police officer was fired. Nothing else has happened. When people inquire, they claim they're still investigating. In the midst of all this, then they settle for $12 million. This is a common practice, as you well know, starting with Central Park 5 and the Scottsboro Boys and everybody else historically, that they want to smear the name of the victim. Whatever man she was involved with.
Yes, we know that, but that was not my focus. I know that these things happen. I've covered more than enough cases.
Sure, I know
where
you have.
These points are very, very important in the cases that I've covered. But that's not the thrust of my discussion today. The thrust of my discussion is that these things notwithstanding, and they are important and they should be pursued and investigated. I'm talking about where it starts. Where it starts is bad decisions.
I don't disagree, but I think we have to go deeper. Where it starts,
yes, we have to. We have to go deeper. I'm not disagreeing with that at all. We have to go deeper. At the same time, let's segregate this thing and really understand what it is I'm trying to say. And that is that very often in the middle of all of this crazy stuff that has happened and all the questions that apply and all the actions of the police and so forth, all of that notwithstanding, there is a beginning point in which
I understand.
two people are very much responsible. They don't know it, perhaps, when they start out, but inevitably, this is how it ends. And this is not the first case that I have come into contact with where we see the woman paying an inordinate price for not constantly examining her own actions and her own responsibility in a relationship that could develop to the point where tragedy occurs. And it's irreversible.
I agree,
at that point.
But this is the issue. I agree with everything you're saying. We're on the same side of the discussion. But my point is that we have to go deeper. We have to look at the fracture and the destruction of the family. We have to look at poor self-image. We have to look at the environment that a lot of these young women grow up in. We have to look at the media now with the influences of the social media and what is deemed acceptable, the lack of their own internal self-respect. We have to. One of my friends, one time I was complaining about something, and my friend said to me, Jackie, to use birth control, that's a conscious decision that the person that's decided they're going to use birth control to protect themselves. I'm not going off on a birth control tangent, but what I'm trying to say is it comes from a place of awareness, of self-protection, and a place of love of your inner and outer self. A place where you say, I am beautiful, regardless of what everything around me is saying that I'm not. And so many of our children, starting from kindergarten all the way up, there's nothing in their society, in their world, that tells them that they're beautiful, that they're worth something. That's number one. The young boys think the only way you can make it is through hustling and gangbanging. Not everybody. I'm not trying to paint a picture, a blanket over everybody. But there's a certain element in the community that thinks a hustler and a gangbanger and making money is the only way that they achieve any kind of notoriety or fame or
Right, but
respect.
she apparently went through 2 cycles of that.
But that's
And
not uncommon.
that means
She came out.
The thing is, we have to raise the questions. Why are people allowing this to happen to them?
Because there's nothing in our society, in our community, that says that a black life has worth. And the quickest way to destroy the black family,
I'm sorry, but I can't
destroy the
agree.
mother and the home.
I can't agree with that.
The hand that rocks the cradle rules the world. The destruction of the black family or any family begins in the home. So if you have
the
women who
destruction of the black family also begins with individual decisions that are made.
I agree.
There's no question
but you're trained to
that
think.
you have to get instruction from someplace about how you rule your life. But in the end, it still comes down to the question, as a 28-year-old woman, you should be able to ask yourself a question about what you're worth, and are you living what you're worth, and to not put yourself in harm's way. And this is a major question, and it's broader than we think in our communities, because lots of people are going through this. They're not out there, they're not, you don't see them, that's in that sense, but this is the life that they're living.
Yes.
And we have to pay attention to it, because here's a person who does not deserve at all to die this way.
We have to reach into these situations and tell the males as well as the females that there is a better way. Some people have grown up in homes where they've never even had anybody to tell them that you have to comb your hair and prepare yourself, even to go out for job interviews. I used to have a job where I would get, youth from the New York State Department of Youth or whatever it was called at that time. And we had to actually explain to them, you have to comb your hair, you have to put on a clean shirt and clothes. Because we grew up, I didn't grow up that way, and I'm sure you didn't either. But there are children who have grown up in situations, especially children that have been abandoned in foster care. They've never had anybody to invest in them. Not at all.
I grant you that. It's a point. But at some point, we have to draw a line and say, whatever your start in life was, you should be able to ask yourself some basic questions and come up with the right answers. You should be able to do that.
What would kick in the trigger that you say, I am worth something, I am somebody? What would trigger the cause a person to say that?
The family knows what would trigger it, because they have a dead child who was a mother on their hands, and who supposedly had an education, and who supposedly had a good job. And this is what she ended up
shot down illegally, like some kind of an animal, when she's at home. If you can't have peace and comfort and safety in your own home, where can you have it? Regardless, I don't care if she was in the bed with Al Capone.
You're raising questions as to deflect. The point I'm making is we have to come to a point where we cannot deny or deflect. We have to raise the question and face the question squarely.
She was a crime victim just as much as somebody who's walking down the street and gets killed by a stray bullet.
She was a crime victim, yes, until we go deeper. She also was conscious. This is her second time around.
It doesn't matter. There's a legal requirement. There's a legal precedent.
No. You see, this is where we have to get some kind of definitive way of dealing with this. This is not a thing where you have all kinds of possible explanations as to why a thing happened. No, deal with what happened.
Trying to
How did
smear
it
her
come to
memory.
happen?
And giving her family $12 million doesn't change that.
No, it doesn't.
And people need to look at all
But
that
there are
kind of thing.
people
Why
who
did it?
in her own family will think that it does.
I don't know if they do or not. I don't know them. But I'm just telling
Well,
you
I am
that if
saying
it's
I've
illegal, it's
covered a lot
illegal.
of these cases, right? I've covered a lot of cases of tragedy. And the
I know you
last
have. And I
thing
know
that
you came
people
from New
are
York and you
inclined
know
to
all
do is to soberly face the music and answer the questions themselves, honestly. They don't want to do that because they have to
Okay, let me
blame
just
somebody else.
other people
And
turn. But let me
you
just say
can't
this
let
to
people
you,
do that.
Yatrice.
But
What
I
were
have
we
to
thinking?
go. We're out of time. We're out of time. I'm sorry. We will pick up this discussion because it's a very important discussion. And I'm saying it's time for us to face these questions soberly and squarely and understand that we can't always put the blame someplace else. We also share in the blame, and we've got to admit to that. Thanks so much for listening, and let's hook up again tomorrow. Bye-bye.